Okay, folks, I'm back, still working on this cup of Christmas coffee. Now, I want to tell you about some techniques that were used to motivate the students as we went through pilot training and then later PET. When I went through UPT, undergraduate pilot training, in 1970, we walked into the T 37 flight room and they had this fairly decent sized board up there and had all our names down the left side of it. And then across the right side, it had a bunch of squares. It was like contact paper. And these squares, this was all mounted on a piece of plexiglass. And it had a covering on it with this contact paper of some kind. I think it was like generic or whatever it is. They had all these squares on there. And these squares had been cut, 1 inch squares, and that you could peel off. Well, behind this, the plexiglass was usually a Playboy model of some kind or another. Um, we didn't know any different, okay? Heathens. Anyway, so the idea was when you'd screw up, um, that was called the boner board. The boner was a screw up. I can't imagine why else they'd call that a boner board. But anyway, so they had all these squares on there, and when you'd screw up, you'd come in and you'd take and you'd peel off one square, and then you'd put a quarter in this container. The idea was they were going to use all the quarter. The idea was to clean off the boner board by the end of the class, and by the time we finished tweets, and then they used the money to go buy a keg of beer. Okay, fine, made sense to me. Anyway, so you'd come in from a flight if you screwed up, or if you screwed up in a flight room or whatever, they'd assess you so many boners to peel off. So you go there and peel them off and put your quarters in and so forth. Well, this one day, we had this IP, Captain Bill Christ, an old short guy, and he was a nice enough guy, I suppose. I didn't get to know him very much. He used to call me Boots because in those days we'd have open ranks inspections before we would begin the day. So we'd step outside the hangar and line up in ranks, open ranks, and he'd come through and inspect us. And he always got to me and he'd look up at me and say, "Holliker, Boots!" Well, okay, I guess they do need shine. Fine. Anyway, so Bill Chris was out flying one day with a student, and they'd gotten clearance for takeoff on the west runway there at Randolph. And so they take the runway, and they're on in those days, we didn't take off in the center of the runway, you took off on either side of it. That's what we typically did. So Captain Christ and his student are lined up on the left side of the runway, and they're spooling it up, and something catches Bill's attention out the right side. He looks over, and there's this other tweet rolling by him. And what it was Buzz Erickson in the other section was flying solo, and he was doing a touch and go on the right side of the runway, and he had touched down behind Bill, and then was rolling by, and these two knotheads are sitting there looking at each other as Buzz goes rolling by. So anyway, I don't know whether he aborted the takeoff or he went and flew, but when Chris came in, he was fried. He walked over to the boner board in D-flight, pulled off the whole strip on Buzz Erickson's line. Anyway, so we had the boner boards in those days, but they kind of went away as we got more and more politically correct. And yeah, anyway, when I got down to Randolph, I got back to Randolph in 82. We went through dogflight, and they had a great idea in dogflight. You ever heard that expression, "cut me some slack"? Well, I don't know if it's Henry that did it or not, but what they had done is they had taken some rope, and they had a eye bolt here. They put into the wall, and they'd hang up some slack like this. And when a student would screw up, they'd cut them some slack and walk over and give it to them. That was cutting them some slack. Anyway, I thought that was kind of an interesting technique to get their attention and motivate them something. It kept things kind of light at times too. But I want to tell you something. When I think of some of these things we used to laugh about, um, they're best left at the flight line. I cut some slack bought this slack rope and put it out in my shop. And one time my wife did something or another, so I cut her a piece of slack and took it in to give it to her. Like I said, some of the things are best left at the flight line. You ever tried to pick a piece of rope out of your ass? Anyway, good seeing everybody. We'll talk to you again.